Chapter 055. Threshold. For nearly half a minute, the endless void they floated in was silent. Neither Zack nor Zorian knew what to say, and the guardian of the threshold seemed content to placidly wait for further questions. Zorian would have liked to say he was considering the implications of this new knowledge at the time, but the truth is that he spent most of it being surprised at how well Zack was taking all this. He kind of expected the other boy to freak out and start swearing and shouting by now. But no, Zack was surprisingly calm and quiet about the situation. The only evidence he was in any way upset was a slight frown on his face. "So," Zack eventually said, his voice cutting through the unnerving silence that sprung up around them. "What now?" "I honestly don't know," Zorian admitted. "I really didn't think Red Robe had already left the time loop. It makes so much sense though now that I look back on things. Yeah, he really screwed us over, didn't he?" Zack sighed. "Well, I wouldn't exactly put it like that," Zorian smiled. "I'm pretty sure this is not what he had been planning. We were meant to disappear. The time loop was supposed to collapse when the controller of the time loop left this place, permanently removing us as a threat. But we're still here, and if the time loop is this out of its normal parameters, it might actually be possible to get out of this place." "Heh," Zack chuckled. "Now that you mention it, yeah. And also, this means I can stop holding back. You too for that matter. We've both been doing our best to keep a low profile to stop Red Robe from noticing our activities. Now that we know he is no longer here." "Yes," Zorian agreed. "The way I see it, we have three main priorities. Number 1, we need to find out how long we have until the time loop collapses. Number 2, we need to find a way to get out. And number 3, we have to try and find out who the hell Red Robe really is so that we can take care of him quickly when we exit this place." Zorian turned to the side to look at the guardian of the threshold, who had been quietly floating in place not far from them while they talked. It didn't appear bothered by them ignoring it. "We should question the guardian about everything we can think of," Zorian noted. "Who knows what kind of critical secrets it knows, and it doesn't appear as if it cares to share anything on its own initiative. Though that could take a while. We should probably return to our bodies for a while to make sure we aren't interrupted." "Do we even have to worry about that?" Zack asked, pulling on his jacket in order to demonstrate the way their clothes seemed an integral part of their body. "The cube seems to have ripped our souls out of our bodies to bring us here. Does it even matter if our bodies get killed out there? We could be just projected here." Zorian shook his head. "It sounds like the simplest way to achieve this, to be honest. Then again, that would leave the loop controller awfully vulnerable while messing around with controls." "Guardian, you are merely projected into this place, but your stay will not be cut short by events in the outside world," the Guardian explained. It was apparently smart enough to interpret what his question was likely going to be based on his and Zack's conversation. "Interesting. If your physical forms suffer critical damage or if soul tampering is detected, I will draw in your souls inside the gate for safekeeping. Your time here will remain uninhibited, though you will have to start a new iteration of the loop in order to leave the place, as I cannot re-anchor your souls back to your bodies if they are not sufficiently intact." "Well, good to know, I guess," Zorian mumbled. He looked at Zack and found that the other boy was already staring at him. "Do you have anything you want to ask the Guardian or?" "You go first," Zack told him, shaking his head. "All right. First of all, is there a time limit as to how long we can remain here?" Zorian asked. "When this iteration of the loop ends, so will your current visit to this place," the Guardian responded. "Other than that, no. So when the time loop restarts, they will be flung back to their bodies at the beginning of the month. But other than that, they could stay here as long as possible. They had plenty of time then." "What are the criteria for each iteration's end?" Zorian asked curiously. "Is mere passage of time sufficient or is there more to it?" "Passage of time is sufficient," the Guardian confirmed. "No iteration is allowed to last for more than a month at the time. Beyond that, there is a multitude of contingencies that will cause the iteration to terminate prematurely." "Can you list those contingencies?" Zorian asked. "No," the Guardian stated emotionlessly. "You aren't authorized for that information." Zorian blinked in surprise. Though he had suspected the Guardian wouldn't be able to answer all of their questions, he thought it would have to do more with it being just a dumb animation spell in the end, not that it would literally refuse to help them like that. "What? But I thought we're the controller," Zack piped in suddenly. "How can we not be authorized to know?" "The controller doesn't have unrestricted authorization," the Guardian explained. Only the Maker and his agents have access to information about the workings of the gate. Maker? Zack repeated incredulously. Maker of what? Of the gate, of course, the Guardian said. Zorian could almost imagine the Guardian rolling his eyes at the question, even though its eyes didn't work like that and its voice never changed in tone. So the controller isn't the ultimate authority when it comes to the gate or the time loop? Zorian asked. The Guardian immediately confirmed this. What can you tell us about this Maker, then? You aren't authorized to know the identity of the Maker, the Guardian informed him. Of course it was going to be something like that. Ugh. This thing is so damn annoying. Zack complained. 10 more fruitless minutes were spent on trying to question the Guardian about the Maker, its agents, whether it was a god, like Zorian suspected, or not, how long it had been since the Maker had last interacted with the gate, and so on. The Guardian's response was the same for each of them. They weren't allowed to know. Zorian wished he could just invade the thing's mind and be done with it, but their inability to perform magic in this place extended to his psychic abilities. They had no way to force the entity into cooperation, and eventually decided to move on to other topics. You said no iteration is allowed to last for more than a month, Zorian reminded the Guardian. Can you tell us why? When an iteration is over, everything in it is destroyed, the Guardian began. Well, good to have that confirmed. Zorian had assumed it was so for a while now, but having the Guardian verify it was nice. Under certain philosophical outlooks, this could be viewed as mass murder. But not under all of them, huh? Zorian mumbled distastefully. Others do not view destruction of copies as a problem, so long as they do not diverge excessively from the original, the Guardian continued, ignoring Zorian's interjection. The time loop is set up under such an assumption. Thus, it is imperative that entities copied by the time loop are not given enough time to meaningfully diverge from the originals, as their destruction would then become unethical. A month was determined to be a good cutoff point. What if one of the copies managed to achieve awareness of the time loop and found a way to maintain continuity across different iterations? Zorian asked. Hypothetically speaking, that would be very unfortunate for the copy, the Guardian noted. Only the controller can actually leave the time loop after all. See, this is the part one don't get, Zack suddenly interjected. Why was such a rule put into place? I mean, there is only one controller to begin with, so why put that sort of limitation in place? To stop the controller from trying to smuggle some of the copies out of the time loop, the Guardian said matter-of-factly, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. There was a short pause as both Zack and Zorian processed this. Why is that important? Zorian asked shakily. Because only the controller has their real soul pulled into the time loop, the Guardian said. Everyone else is a copy. For a controller of the loop to leave, I only have to re-anchor their soul back to their original body. For one of the copies to enter the real world, I would have to switch their soul with the soul of the original. This would effectively kill the original. There was another, longer pause following this explanation. Zorian wasn't terribly surprised at the fact that him leaving the loop would require he switch his soul with his original. It was one of the first ideas he came up with himself, after all. What surprised him was that Zack was apparently not a copy. Being the controller had more to it than just having a marker stamped on your soul, it seemed. So the controller has their original soul drawn into the time loop when it is first made, Zorian said. They aren't a copy, so there is no problem with them leaving. But everyone else would have to kill someone to get out, and that's unacceptable. Is that correct? Yes, the Guardian agreed. But you could do that? Zack suddenly spoke up. If one of the copies wanted to leave this place, you could switch their soul with that of the original? Theoretically, the Guardian admitted, but that goes against what I was made to do. I am the Guardian of the Threshold. One of the main tasks the Maker gave me was to ensure things inside the time loop could not menace the source of the template. If a diverged copy tried to kill the original by switching their souls with it, I would do my best to stop them. What about a normal undiverged copy? Asked Zorian. Surely there is no harm in replacing the original with a normal copy. They're practically the same thing. It's what makes it okay to destroy millions of souls every month or so, isn't it? The Guardian hesitated. A short, tense silence descended on the scene as it considered the scenario. So long as the copies do not diverge too much from the original, such a switch would be theoretically acceptable, the Guardian eventually admitted. But it is my purpose to keep the time loop from spilling out in the real world as much as possible, so I would still refuse to perform such a switch. Only the controller, with the knowledge and secrets they gathered inside the time loop, is allowed to leave and make their mark on the world outside, since they are technically of that world to begin with. All right, Zorian nodded, signaling Zack with his hand to drop the issue. Though still very placid, the Guardian seemed almost agitated by their current line of questioning. Zorian was afraid that if they pushed it too much it might realize one of them was a copy somehow and do something to correct this. Best to leave the topic alone for now. Let's move on to something else. Guardian, you said the gate is barred because the controller has already left the time loop? Yes, the entity confirmed. Can you tell me how many iterations that was ago? Zorian asked. The controller is still inside the time loop, controller, the Guardian said unhelpfully. Some more variations of that question confirmed that the Guardian had no idea when Red Robe left. The controller left but didn't actually leave, and the Guardian was hopelessly confused about the whole thing. Asking the Guardian for Red Robe's description or other identifying information didn't work either. The Guardian didn't seem to perceive the world in the same way they did, despite its fairly human-like appearance and the lifelike avatars he and Zack were inhabiting. It seemed to ignore just about everything in terms of identifying characteristics when it come to the controller. Other than the marker, of course. So the controller that left has the marker then? Zorian asked. Of course, the Guardian confirmed. How could he have left otherwise? How does the controller get the marker in the first place? Zorian asked. Is it hereditary, assigned by the gate itself according to some criteria, or what? The controller is marked by the key, by the maker, or by its agents, the Guardian said. I am not aware of what criteria were used in choosing any particular controller. It is ultimately irrelevant to my purpose to know such things. But the key is lost, Zack said, frowning. Scattered across vast distances. And if the maker is a god like you suspect he is, well, the gods have been silent for centuries. That only leaves his agents. Who would that be? Impossible to say for now, Zorian shrugged. But apparently you were purposely chosen by someone to go in here. Or maybe Red Robe was, Zack said gloomily. I know you think I'm the original looper, but the fact that Red Robe was capable of leaving just like that, it could be that he's the one who's the real deal. You saw how the Guardian reacted to the possibility of switching souls between the copy and the original. How did Red Robe leave if he's just a copy? I don't know, Zorian sighed. It's too bad the Guardian gets all stupid whenever anything involving Red Robe leaving is brought up. If it didn't get all stupid about it, we would have probably been erased out of existence when Red Robe left, Zack told him. So that's probably a blessing in disguise. Anyway, Guardian, this marker I have on me is unique, yes? There is no way for there to be multiple controller markers. None, the Guardian confirmed. Before the time loop is activated, marking a new person will invalidate the old marker. Inside the time loop, the controller marker cannot be invoked, and only lesser markers can be placed. Lesser markers? What the hell are those now? Zack protested. The controller can temporarily add people to the time loop by placing a lesser marker on them, the Guardian explained. What? Zack squawked. There is a way to include someone in the time loop and you're only mentioning this now? And what do you mean temporary? Though I'm happy to answer any question you may have to the best of my ability, I am ultimately not designed to teach the controller how to operate the time loop, the Guardian said. That is the job of whoever placed the marker on you. And by temporary, I mean that the target of the lesser marker will retain their memories and abilities for up to 6 iterations before the marker dissolves. Why would this lesser marker be temporary like that? Zack asked, baffled. Is there a way to make it permanent? It is temporary to keep divergence from the original to a manageable level and discourage the controller from getting excessively emotionally attached to copies marked in such a fashion, the Guardian explained. There is no way to make it permanent as that would be needlessly cruel. They cannot leave the time loop after all. But if copies that retain awareness for more than a month count as people and killing them is wrong, doesn't that mean that using these lesser markers is effectively murder? Yes, the Guardian readily agreed. But it is not the gate that does it, so it is acceptable. It is up to the controller to decide when and if they feel comfortable using such an ability. So, Zorian began after a short pause. I would never have used such a spell, Zack immediately said, correctly guessing what Zorian was about to ask. Never. Why would I torture myself by bringing people into the loop, knowing that they would suddenly go back to their old ignorant self in just 6 restarts? Fair enough, Zorian said, guessing he had touched upon a sensitive topic. Guardian, what about the ability to expel people from the time loop? Make them start each iteration soulless and dead? Does this ability exist? The controller has such an ability as well, the Guardian confirmed. By now, Zorian knew better than to ask whether such an ability had been used in the past. The Guardian had very limited awareness about what happened in the time loop itself, caring for little except the controller itself. How about the ability to restore people erased in such a manner back? He asked instead. He was still angry at the matriarch for planning to betray him, but he wanted her back anyway. No, the Guardian said. The ability instructs the gate to make changes to the base template that is used to construct each iteration. There is no undoing them without direct intervention from the maker. The controller is advised to use this ability with wisdom and restraint. For the next 20 minutes, Zack and Zorian tried to question the Guardian about the manner in which these abilities could be performed by the controller or about any other abilities they may have at their disposal. Sadly, neither of those inquiries achieved results. The Guardian did not know how any of these abilities might be accomplished, and it refused to list all the abilities the controller had, saying they were not authorized to know that information. This makes no sense, Zack complained. It's happy to tell us about specific abilities if we ask, but a simple list of all options is forbidden? Well, it sort of makes sense if the maker didn't want every controller to know about all the features at their disposal, mused Zorian. If some or all of the controllers are given limited information, you don't want to let the Guardian tell them all about it anyway. Another fruitless question and answer session occurred, where Zorian tried to ask the Guardian about the history of the time loop and its purpose. The Guardian claimed not to have any knowledge of previous time loops, though beyond simply knowing they existed. Apparently, it did not retain its memories between different time loops. As for the purpose of the time loop, the purpose of the time loop is between the controller and the one who marked them, the Guardian concluded. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say it is whatever the controller wants it to be. There is little to stop them from doing whatever they want while inside the time loop, after all. Alright, next question then, Zorian sighed. Can you tell me how long will it be before the time loop runs out of whatever is powering it and shuts down? That is to say, how long do we have to leave this place? Yes, of course. The time loop has enough power for 52 more iterations before it must shut down, the Guardian said. Assuming maximum utilization of each iteration, that is equivalent to little more than 4 years of operation. 4 years. Maybe he was just greedy, but that seemed very short to him. He asked the Guardian about that just to see what it would say. He expected it to refuse to answer, bringing up their lack of sufficient authorization or whatever, but the Guardian actually had an answer for them this time. The time loop is normally supposed to be initiated at the peak of planetary alignment, the Guardian explained. Unfortunately, something seems to have gone wrong and the time loop has been activated 1 month prior to it. This made everything more costly, causing the time loop to degrade far more rapidly than it is supposed to. Do you know how long the time loop had been in existence thus far? Zorian asked. 967 iterations, the Guardian answered. Approximately 30 years in linear time. Wait, those numbers were kind of strange. How could almost 1,000 iterations equal 30 measly years? Wait, frowned Zorian. So the time loop spends power per iteration, not according to how much time passes? Yes, the Guardian confirmed. But I cut a lot of restarts short by dying to some stupid shit in the first few days, Zack protested. Are you telling me I've been burning through our allotted time every time I did that? Yes, the Guardian confirmed again blandly. It is the controller's right to do such a thing, however. Presumably you felt the gains were worth the sacrifice of additional time. Hell no, I didn't. Zack protested. I just didn't know any better. If I knew all this, I would have been a lot more cautious about this shit. Unfortunate, the Guardian said. It did not sound very sorry or compassionate, however, using the same pleasantly bland voice it always did. It seems you were poorly prepared for this undertaking. You should complain to whoever gave you the marker once you get outside. Yeah, I'll get right on that. Just as soon as I manage to find the bastard, Zack said gloomily. So anyway, let's just get this finally out of the way. Guardian, how can we unbar the gate? You would have to present me with the key by bringing it before the gate, the Guardian said simply. If you present all 5 pieces, you will gain sufficient authorization to reopen the gate. I don't suppose you could tell us where to find those things then? Zack tried. No, the Guardian immediately answered. Of course. But finding them should not be too difficult for you. Your marker can sense their presence. Not for the first time, Zorian wished the damn marker stamped on his soul came with an instruction manual or something. Though they continued to question the Guardian for 2 more hours, very little new information came out of it. When they finally decided to leave, the Guardian informed them that they would have to start a new iteration of the time loop because their bodies had been excessively damaged, while they talked to the Guardian, and the dumb thing didn't find it important to mention that until they were ready to leave. After about 5 minutes, when Zorian realized Zack was not going to stop ranting at the Guardian anytime soon, he just reached into his soul and flipped the marker restart switch. Everything went mercifully dark and silent. Break. Like always, Zorian's awakening was done via Kiriel jumping on top of him. The events immediately following the awakening were also fairly typical, with him having his talk with Ilsa and dodging Mother's attempts at conversation while having breakfast. He even ended up inviting Kiriel to come with him to Saioria, despite initially planning to leave her behind. Partially this was because he realized his vague plans of rushing to gather the key as soon as possible and find a way to fool the Guardian into letting him out were rather premature, and he should really take some time to calm down and digest things a little. But an equally important reason for it was that he realized he needed a break. The previous restart had been very exhausting, what with all the non-stop Arania hunting and the various revelations at the end, and he didn't feel like jumping into another long-term mission right away. Taking a restart or 2 to relax a little and think things through wasn't going to kill them. The time limit they had was uncomfortably short for his tastes, but not that short. He was just wondering how to explain all this to Zack when they next meet each other when he was interrupted by the knock on the door. What? That doesn't usually happen. He went to open the door, reaching out with his mind sense towards the unknown visitor, only to find Zack on the doorstep. Apparently his fellow time traveler wasn't content to wait for him on Saioria's train station. Zorian was kind of shocked, and not just by the fact Zack decided to come to his home. He could actually sense Zack's mind now. It was still shielded, but the boy wasn't under the effect of mind blank anymore. Zorian was kind of touched at the show of trust this represented. "Hello Zack," Zorian said. "Fancy seeing you here." "Yeah, well, our last meeting's ending was a little abrupt," Zack told him with a little glare. "So I thought I should drop by and finish our conversation." "Sorry," Zorian winced. "I know ending things so suddenly was a jerk move, but I was already kind of depressed from what the Guardian was saying, and you getting into a one-sided shouting match with the thing was—" "It's fine," Zack said, waving him away. "I lost my nerves too. It's probably for the best you shut me down before I did something stupid. That thing seemed pretty uncaring, but if anyone can manage to piss off a non-sapient spell construct, it's me." "Zorian, who is that?" Mother suddenly said, walking up to them. Turning around, Zorian could also see Kiriel peering from behind the kitchen door as well, watching the situation unfold. "It's just Zack," Zorian said. "He's one of my classmates from Saioria." "Oh my," Zorian finally has friends visiting him at home, Mother noted in exaggerated mirth. "I never thought I'd see the day. Could I get an introduction?" "Sure," Zorian agreed. It was only polite. "Mother, this is Zack Novita, a friend and a classmate. Zack, this is Sikin Kaczynski, my mother. The little girl peering from behind the door is my little sister, Kiriel." Mother gave Kiriel an annoyed glare and gestured her to come over and introduce herself properly. Huffing slightly at the order, Kiriel approached and shook hands with Zack as proper manners dictated. "What, no Fortov?" Zack asked with a whisper. Mother always had good hearing though, so she ended up hearing anyway. "He's at his friend's place right now. He'll meet us at the train station so you can see him there. I assume you intend to take a train to Saioria along with Zorian, yes?" "Yes. The train. Of course," Zack fumbled, giving Zorian a questioning glance. He had probably expected them to just excuse themselves and teleport to Saioria. "I decided to take Kiriel with me to Saioria this time," Zorian said. "I hope you don't mind her traveling with us." Kiriel gave Zack the hardest look she could muster, daring him to disagree with her coming along. Right. "Of course I'm okay with that," said Zack. What followed was about 20 minutes of Mother trying to talk Zack into accepting something to drink and fishing for information about him. Zack decided not to mention he was the last living heir of a noble house, possibly because he still remembered what Zorian had told him about his mother, and simply described himself as a wealthy orphan from Cyoria. Based on the looks mother gave him, however, Zorian was pretty sure she suspected the truth. She was quite perceptive about these sorts of things. Eventually, the four of them packed up and left towards Siren's train station. How come Zack doesn't have any luggage to carry along? Kiriel protested, glaring at the bag of her own things that mother had forced her to carry herself. Well, I'm from Cyoria to begin with, Zack said with a grin. My luggage is already there. Unfair, she mumbled. Oh, you'll see unfair when we get to Cyoria, Zorian told her. There's an hour walk from the train station to where we'll be staying, and I heard it's going to rain too. When they finally reached the train station, they found Fortov already there talking to his friends. Mother insisted on introducing Zack to him, which annoyed Zorian far more than it probably should have. No offense, Zorian, but your family seems pretty nice to me thus far, Zack told him later, when he finally managed to excuse himself from Fortov's group. Maybe I'm a little biased since my family all died and I wish I actually had a family, but I honestly can't figure out your animosity for them. It's personal, Zorian told him in a clipped tone. There's a lot of history that you aren't aware of. Just drop it. Fine, whatever, Zack sighed. I don't want to start a fight. I actually want to apologize. Zorian gave him a strange look. Apologize? Zorian asked curiously. What for? Well, you mentioned last time how I keep up a mind blank around you at all times and how it means I don't trust you. You don't have to apologize for that, Zorian told him, shaking his head. I also told you I would have done the same in your place, remember? No offense, but I don't want to be like you, Zorian, Zack said, shaking his head. Well, screw you too, Zack. The feeling was mutual. The point is, you were right. We don't trust each other and we're not going to get anywhere if we have that constantly hanging over our heads. We need to work together if we want to have any chance of getting out of here. Well, that wasn't quite what he said, but since Zorian actually agreed with the sentiment, he didn't interrupt. So anyway, I think you already noticed I'm not under the effect of mind blank, Zack said. Of course, Zorian nodded. I do notice your mind is still shielded though. Well, yeah, Zack said, rolling his eyes. Trust your neighbors but lock your door, you know? I wasn't complaining, Zorian said. I was just going to notice the shield doesn't feel like a spell. That's a non-structured mental defense, yes. Of course you already tested it, Zack sighed. Goddamn mind readers. But yes, it's non-structured. I got it a long time ago, back in the first decade of my looping. It's kind of rough for something you've been practicing for decades, Zorian admitted. I mean, I know it's hard to practice non-structured mind magic when you aren't psychic like me, but I've seen other regular mages with similar defenses and theirs were a lot better than this. I never really refined it much since, well, I never needed it for anything more complex than resisting casual mind reading and the like, Zack said. This isn't just me being lazy, mind you. This is pretty much conventional wisdom about non-structured mental defenses among mages. Or at least that's what the various magic instructors I learned from told me. Get just enough skill in the ability to foil casual attacks and deal with anything more severe with proper defensive wards and the like. If you don't have time to set up those, locate the source of the mental attack and go on the offensive. Or just outright flee from the scene. Most mages agree that fancy non-structured mental defenses are more trouble than they're worth. Well, I'm kind of biased, but I don't agree, Zorian said. Yes, I feel a bit stupid now for just accepting conventional wisdom when it comes to that, Zack admitted. I've been stuck in a time loop for decades. It's not like I didn't have the time. I've honed far more useless skills to perfection just for bragging rights, so I really shouldn't have skimped out on something like this. But enough of that. I have a request for you. Go ahead, Zorian nodded, motioning him to continue. Don't mess with my mind without my express permission, Zack said. Even if you catch me without any mental protection or something. Well, okay, Zorian agreed. I can respect that. What if I suspect you to be under the influence of another mind mage already, though? I have to think about that, Zack fumbled. For now, no. Don't mess with my mind even then. Just knock me out and wait for the effect to wear off. Zorian wanted to point out that some mind effects didn't wear off. But he could see that Zack was still very uncomfortable around mind magic and decided to postpone this talk for some other time. All right. I'll leave your mind alone. I will only use my mind sense and empathy on you, since they require no mental invasion to use and it's almost impossible for me to not use them on someone. Anything else? Yeah, Zack said. The fact you can sense and manipulate the marker placed on us and I can't really burns, you know? I can accept you're a better mind mage than I'll ever be since it's your special ability and all. But this personal soul sense of yours is something I could have easily acquired myself if I knew about it. Do you think you can teach me how to do that? I think I'll have to set you up with one of my teachers to do that, Zorian frowned. Alanik has access to potions I have never even encountered elsewhere and knowledge of how to help if something goes horribly wrong. I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem, though. He's a pretty helpful person despite initial appearances. Eventually the train arrived and they were forced to cut their conversation a little short. Since they were going to share a compartment with Kiriel for the rest of the ride, any sensitive conversations would have to wait for a while. Even if they had wanted to talk about something arcane though, Kiriel wouldn't have let them. Any apprehension she felt towards Zack melted away during the first 20 minutes of the train ride and the resulting boredom. She started asking Zack questions about Cyoria and the academy. Later on, Zack would remark how surprised he was at the way Kiriel treated him, as Kiriel had been rather more unfriendly towards him in the previous restart. But as Zorian explained to him, that Kiriel was one who had a far worse impression of Zack, and that bad first impression of Zack had never really left her for the rest of the restart. The way Kiriel was treating him now was actually far closer to her true personality than what he experienced before. Kind of strange that you don't like most of your family, but you're so close to your little sister, Zack remarked. Was it always like that or? I always did like her best out of all of them, Zorian said. But no, I did not have this good of a relationship with her before the time loop. There was a reason why I had never brought her along before I started retaining my awareness across restarts. I figured it was something like that, Zack said. So do we have a plan for this restart or what? I was hoping we could take a break for a restart or two, Zorian sighed. I need to think about things and come to terms with all of this. It's a lot to take in. Fine, Zack said eventually. I guess we should spend some time getting to know each other anyway. You can still introduce me to that Alanik fellow that teaches personal soul sensing, right? Absolutely, Zorian confirmed. You can work on your soul sense while we decide what to do. It's not like I intend to literally do nothing myself, you know. Oh, what do you have in mind for yourself? Zack asked. I've been pursuing lessons from my mentor, Svim, but I could never really properly focus on them thus far. Now that I don't have the decaying memory packet in my head demanding most of my attention, I figure I should finally be able to give him all my attention and see what the results are. I'm still not sure how much to really tell him about the time loop and how it functions, though. I'm freaked out by how it works and I'm actually aware of the restarts. I'm not sure it's a good idea to explain to Svim what's really going on. I can't help you there, Zack shook his head. I never had much luck in convincing people about the time loop, and that was before I knew all this crazy stuff about it that I do now. I have no idea how you even convinced Svim to take you seriously about time travel, considering he never believed me when I tried to do the same. You went to Svim to try and tell him about the time loop? Zorian asked. I guess you really meant it when you said you went to just about everyone with the story. Yeah, Zack agreed. Do you think it might help you convince him you're telling the truth if I came with you? I can do some pretty crazy magic on demand by now. I don't know, Zorian said. I didn't mention you when I talked to him previously, but that was mostly to minimize any links between the two of us in case Red Robe somehow caught wind of Svim's investigation in the time loop. Now that we know Red Robe is gone, it might be a good idea to include you into the story. Zorian considered things for a few seconds. I'll go alone on Monday, Zorian decided. But I'll tell him you're also a time traveler and see if he wants to meet you. Of course Svim wanted to meet him. Frankly, if Zorian was in Svim's place and a student came to him with a story about being a time traveler and then another student was also a time traveler, he'd react the same way too. Thus, the very next day after Zorian's talk with Svim, he returned to the man's office with Zack in tow. So, Mr. Novita, Svim began. Mr. Kaczynski here claims you and he are stuck in a time loop, and have lived through this month many times before. You've lived longer than him apparently. I've already heard Mr. Kaczynski's story and saw the evidence he had for it, and now I'm curious to hear your side of it. But before we get to that, I admit I'm curious about your level of skill. Do you mind if we take an hour or two to test your magical abilities? Sure, Zack shrugged. I guess we're going to have to leave the office for that, though. That won't be necessary, Mr. Novita, Svim told him. The test will consist of simple shaping exercises. Shaping exercises? Zack asked, surprised. Kind of underwhelming, but okay. Ready when you are. Oh dear. Should Zorian warn him? No, it would be more amusing this way. Levitate this pen, please, Svim told Zack, handing him one of the many pens strewn along his desk. And then make it spin in the air. Zack smiled, doing just that with total ease. At which point a marble nailed him straight in his forehead, causing him to lose concentration and stop levitating the pen, never mind spinning it. What? Zack asked incredulously. You failed, Svim informed him, finger tapping against the table impatiently. But, you threw a marble at me, Zack protested. And you immediately lost concentration, Svim said with a long sigh. Shameful. And you're supposed to be someone who trained magic for literally decades? What could you have possibly been doing all this time? Zorian here would have never let some little thing like that distract him, and he has only been stuck in the time loop for a few years. There was a long pause as Zack looked incredulously between Svim and Zorian, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Zorian was struggling not to laugh. He could kind of understand why Svim had done this. It was an asshole move and completely inappropriate for a teacher, but damn if it wasn't amusing. Well, I suppose it's to be expected, Svim said. Decades of shoddy instruction is nonetheless shoddy instruction. One more promising student failed by the poor state of our magical education. Let's try that again, only properly this time. Start over. I hate this guy, Zack told him as they left Svim's office. I don't think I've ever wanted to strangle someone more in my entire life. Yes, Svim has that kind of effect on people, Zorian agreed. I mean, I knew he was an asshole, but I never quite realized he was that much of an asshole. You know? Because he knew. Well, how Zorian knew. If he's always like that, then why the hell did you keep coming back to him restart after restart? Zack asked incredulously. I wanted to prove him wrong, Zorian shrugged. He was an ass, but he was demanding excellence in something I'd always felt I was good at, and so I just couldn't let it go. Besides, he's not utterly terrible once you get to know him a little. Not utterly terrible, Zack repeated, rolling his eyes. I really hope this is the end of it and I never have to talk to the guy again. You know, Svim is pretty good at non-structured mental defenses, Zorian said innocently. No, Zack said immediately. What? Zorian grinned. I was just going to suggest you ask him for help in mastering the ability. I'm sure he'd be happy to help you train. No. Absolutely not, Zack shook his head. And don't think I didn't notice how much you were enjoying yourself while I suffered in there. I'll find a way to pay you back somehow, you'll see. Rather than be intimidated by the threat, Zorian finally laughed. Chapter 056. Despite how much the experience had annoyed Zack, Zorian judged their meeting with Svim to have been a full success. Sure, Svim had been openly dismissive of Zack's skills, but that was just Svim being Svim. The man had been impressed in his own way, else he would not have kept pushing Zack towards ever more demanding shaping exercises as their meeting progressed. Not that this outcome was surprising. There was a lot to be impressed about when it came to Zack's shaping, especially if one knew how big his mana reserves were. His fellow time traveler had not honed his shaping skills to the same ridiculous standard that Zorian had achieved under Svim's tutelage, but he was clearly far better than he had any right to be. Zorian was confident that the skills Zack displayed in that office would be taken as a point in their favor. The next day, Zorian decided to introduce Zack to Alanik as well and see if the priest was open to the idea of teaching Zack some of his soul defenses. Accordingly, they went to the priest first thing in the morning, effectively skipping an entire day of classes. Not that skipping classes was much of a problem for either of them at this point. The start of the meeting went about as Zorian expected it would. Zack talked, Alanik listened, and Zorian mostly stayed quiet. The priest already knew the nature of their request, since Zorian had already explained things to him while arranging the meeting, but he wanted to hear Zack's version of the story as well before he agreed to anything. Thankfully, Zack successfully kept to the script and didn't blurt out anything he wasn't supposed to. Their story was in essence very simple. The two of them had ended up on the receiving end of a soul magic attack and now had some kind of marker stamped on their soul. Zack, being shaken by the experience, now wanted to learn how to defend himself from similar attacks. There is one thing that is bothering me about this, Alanik told them when Zack finished his tale, shifting his attention from Zack to Zorian. If both of you suffered from this attack, how come only Zack is interested in learning how to defend his soul? Does the experience you went through not worry you as well? Ah, well, I already know how to perceive and defend my soul, Zorian admitted. Really? Olenek said curiously, raising his eyebrows in a silent question. Why would I lie? Asked Zorian with a shrug. Olenek stared at him for a second before reaching across the table they were gathered around and grasping his shoulder tightly in his hand. Zorian was about to ask him what the hell he thought he was doing when suddenly all of his senses went haywire. He swayed in his chair for a moment, the world around him spinning and melting like a bad illusion and his body feeling like it was being twisted into some unnatural form. Then he realized what was happening and used his magic to violently shove Alanek's attack away from his soul. It worked, and the world immediately returned to normal. But Zorian had an uncomfortable feeling that had more to do with Olenek backing off at the first sign of resistance than him being all that good. He gave the man a nasty glare, and Olenek removed his hand from Zorian's shoulder. Shoddy defenses, Olenek said. Serviceable but shoddy. You should reconsider your decision, Mr. Kaczynski. You could use my instruction as much as Mr. Novita here. I know that. Zorian snapped. I just thought that Olenek would refuse to teach him, since he didn't want to do so in previous restarts. Well, not without receiving explanations that Zorian had been unwilling to give the man at that time. You know what? Never mind that, Zorian sighed. Does that mean you're willing to teach us, then? Both of us? I suppose I am, Olenek said, tapping his fingers against the table for a few seconds. You are hiding things from me, but I don't think it's something sinister. Who taught you how to feel your soul, if I may ask? A friendly shifter, said Zorian. Partially true, even if Olenek had done the lion's share of the work. A shifter, huh? Olenek said, giving him another long look. Very well. Come with me so I can check up on this marker you two received from your attacker. We don't want it removed, Zack hurriedly said. Yes, you already said that, Olenek said. I just want to have a look. Don't worry, I'm not doing anything to you without your consent. You mean like launching a surprise soul attack to test our claims of already having a soul defense? Asked Zorian snidely. Don't be so whiny, Olenek told him unsympathetically. That was just a light tap, spiritually speaking. That light tap almost caused me to vomit all over your table, Zorian told him. Humph, Olenek scoffed. Your defenses are even shoddier than I thought, then. Sighing, Zorian decided to drop the issue. What is it with you and annoying teachers? Zack whispered to him as they followed Olenek deeper into the temple that served as his house. Is this going to be a recurring thing with you? I don't think I can handle a repeat of the Svim episode this soon. Zorian was tempted to bring Zack to Silver Lake after this, just to show him the true meaning of annoying. At least Olenek and Svim were each helpful in their own way in addition to being hard to deal with. He wondered if Zack was good enough to deal with the Grey Hunter. He probably could kill the beast, but could he do it in a way that keeps the eggs intact? Though now that he thought about it, Silver Lake probably doesn't count as a teacher. She had taught him precisely nothing so far. Mr. Zosk is way less annoying than Svim, he whispered back to Zack, putting his musings aside for the moment. He can be pretty harsh at times, but he's always fair. He doesn't insult people without good reason. The truth is my soul defenses really are shoddy at the moment. Give him a chance. I'm happy you have so much faith in me, Mr. Kaczynski, Olenek said, butting into their conversation. Oops, guess they weren't quiet enough. Or maybe Alanek's hearing was just that good. This Svim fellow you keep talking about sounds fascinating. I hope you can introduce us sometime. Zorian made a sour face. Bringing Svim and Olenek together into the same room? Yeah, no way in hell was he letting that happen. Olenek seemed to have noticed Zorian's distaste for the idea because he actually laughed at him. I was just joking, Mr. Kaczynski, the priest said, his voice still tinged with amusement. If I really wanted to meet this Svim, I would have sought him out on my own. With a name like that, I doubt he'd be hard to find. I suppose you're right, Zorian admitted. Svim was a fairly exotic name, and he had a feeling that his mentor was rather famous within certain circles as well. Everyone who worked in a prestigious institution like Scioria's Royal Magical Academy was at least somewhat famous. All in all, Svim probably wasn't very hard to find for someone like Olenek, who clearly had connections to one or more spy organizations. Not for the first time, Zorian found himself wondering what exactly would happen if he told Olenek about the time loop. Not in this restart, obviously, but as an idea for the future. Well, he could use the Battle Priest's help and advice. Then again, he wasn't working alone anymore, was he? He would have to see what Zack would say about that. Well, hopefully Olenek would leave a better impression on Zack than Svim had. Ugh, Zack said as they departed from Alanek's home. That psychedelic potion is pure hell. And I'm apparently going to have to go through several restarts worth of that stuff. You didn't have to take it, Zorian pointed out. Its only purpose is to speed things up. You could have taken the slow, painless way and meditated your way to soul perception. No, I know my limits, Zack said, shaking his head. Even you opted for the fast route, and I'm even more impatient than you are. How you managed to pretend to be unaware of the time loop all this time I'll never fathom. What did he have you do while I was off hallucinating anyway? That light touch stuff he tried on me earlier, grimaced Zorian. He kept using weak soul attacks on me while having me fight him off. It's helpful, I guess. At the very least it gives me some experience in fending off soul manipulation. I usually rely on actual defensive wards to counter hostile soul magic. But this sort of stuff is useful if I'm ever caught off guard with some casual soul spell. Strange though. Why is Olenek willing to help me refine my soul defenses now that I've brought you along? Why does your presence make him less suspicious of me? I guess I just look like a more honest person than you do, Zack said with a grin. Zorian rolled his eyes at him. Anyway, what now? Now. Well, you either go home and do whatever you want or you go with me to Nyazovdveri while I visit the local dungeon, Zorian told him. I was going to go there while you had your lessons with Olenek, but that idea obviously had to be scrapped, so I guess I'll do it now. You were going to go have fun in the dungeon while I suffered back there? Zack frowned. Depends how you define fun, Zorian said. I'm just going to load up on crystallized mana before getting back to the surface. I'm not sure I understand, Zack said. Why would you need so much crystallized mana? Money, of course, Zorian said. I use some of it for my magic items and golems, but most of it is sold for some quick cash. I memorized where the crystal clumps are over the restarts, so it doesn't take long to pick up a lot of them. It's almost like collecting money. Zack was quiet for a while. Well, crap, said Zack after a while. That's clever. Why didn't I think of that? I could have used that trick a decade or so ago. What, you had cash problems? Zorian asked curiously. Aren't you obscenely rich? I don't have nearly as much money as people think. Zack shook his head. Oh right, his guardian kind of robbed him. Hell, I don't have nearly as much money as I thought I did, thanks to my slimy caretaker. But the real problem is that most of my money is unavailable to me. It's all either banked into long-term accounts or stored away in ways that make it really hard for me to get to it on short notice. And even if I could get to it easily, I would still have to justify my expenses to my caretaker and get his permission in order to spend any significant sum. Which means that when I really wanted to spend a lot of money during the restarts, I basically had to get the money from scratch somehow. And how did you solve that? Well, these days I just kill some rare magical creature and sell the corpse, Zack shrugged. You can earn huge amounts of cash if you know who to sell it to. I really like your solution though. It's a lot safer and not even that much more time-consuming. Doesn't dumping a huge amount of crystallized mana on the market collapse the price, though? Zorian shook his head. In the grand scheme of things, the amounts of crystallized mana I can gather in a few days are a drop in the bucket. Even if I focused on doing nothing else for the entire restart, I'd only produce a fraction of what dedicated mines produce on a daily basis. Though trying to sell too much to individual shops does tend to bring unwanted attention. Alright, Zack nodded. So how are we doing this? Later that day when they finally returned to Syoria, Zorian was lugging no less than 5 luggage boxes full of crystallized mana. A lot more than his excursions into the dungeons beneath Nyazovdveri usually got him. They probably went a little overboard with their crystal collection, but that was fine. One could never have too much money. Zorian usually stuck to the safer areas of the dungeon he had mapped and explored a long time ago when embarking on his crystal gathering expeditions, but Zack had insisted they explore the dungeon a little deeper than usual this time. Since the other time traveler was so powerful, Zorian had agreed. He was actually somewhat curious if they could find something interesting. In the end though, they didn't discover anything too amazing. Just several new crystal clumps and some strange cave plants that Zorian couldn't identify and decided to bring along with him. He could then show them to Kale when the boy finally showed up again. They didn't stumble upon anything particularly dangerous, which pleased Zorian, who didn't want to end the restart short because they died to some stupid monster in the dungeon depths, and disappointed Zack, who had been hoping for a good fight to blow off some steam. Just as they were about to separate and go each to their own homes, Zack suddenly spoke up. That was kind of fun, he said. We should go deeper next time. That's a bad idea, Zorian said. We already went past the depth where I met this floating mass of eyes that killed me just by looking at me. It's only luck we didn't meet anything like that today. Do you really want to cut one of our restarts short by dying to some stupid monster? Ugh. You're no fun, Zack complained. We can always go hunting all the monsters that are terrorizing the city now that Arania are gone, Zorian pointed out. I already did that with Taven in previous restarts, but, well, I can never really set myself loose when I'm around her. She knows me too well to accept my growth in skill at face value. Taven. I remember her, Zack said. She was your date for the evening that time when I invited all the students to my home for the summer festival. Are you close to her? Not in the way you're probably thinking of. We're just friends, Zorian said. Friends that go on dates together? Zack said with a grin. I'm pretty sure I told you something like this back then, but Taven isn't interested in guys like me. I'm not her type, Zorian responded, hoping this was the end of it. Yeah, fat chance of that. Ah, so she shot you down then, Zack nodded sagely. Well, don't let it get to you. You can't get to them all, even with the time loop and its multiple retries. I never managed to talk either Rainy or Akoja to go out on a date with me, for example, no matter what I tried. Zorian was sorely tempted to ask Zack about his attempts to woo Akoja, since that was bound to have been amusing in a train wreck sort of way. In the end, however, he decided that he really didn't want to know. I hope you realize that I've been in this time loop for only a handful of years and that most of that time has been spent while under threat and under pressure from various emergencies, Zorian told him. Yes, so? Zack asked, not understanding his point. Aside from picking a girl for the date at the end of the restart, I never went out on any dates, Zorian told him. Did his meetings with Rainy count as dates? No, probably not. I certainly didn't go after every single girl in the class like you seem to have done. Zack stared at him in silence for a few seconds, apparently struck speechless at Zorian's statement. Seriously? He eventually asked, his voice incredulous. Seriously, Zorian confirmed. You're crazy, Zack told him. Mark my words, you'll regret this once we're out of this time loop. You'll never get a chance like this in your life. You sound like an old man, Zorian said. Well, I am several decades older than you, Zack pointed out. Listen to your elders, young man, I know what I'm talking about. 10 minutes and a lot of pointless banter later, they finally called it a day and separated. Strangely enough, despite the fact he spent the entire day either having his soul slapped around, crawling through dark monster-infested tunnels or being teased by his fellow time traveler, Zorian found himself happy with how it turned out. Though he really could have gone without that last conversation. Now he couldn't stop thinking about the various girls in his life. And he was certain that if Zack knew about it, he would be laughing at his predicament. The jerk. 2 days after their meeting with Svim, the man called Zorian in his office to tell him that he had tentatively accepted his story as plausible and to talk about what they should do next. That was surprisingly fast. It was interesting to experience just how big of an effect Zack's presence had on people he talked to. Both Svim and Alanik seemed to be taking him more seriously this time around, just because there was a second person backing his story up. Was it just that multiple people were convincing in a way that a single person wasn't, or was there more to it? He was tempted to ask Svim about the topic directly, but it was unlikely he could offer much insight into the thought processes of his previous incarnations and would force him to admit he was purposely restricting Svim's access to relevant information about the time loop. Regardless, he currently found himself standing in front of Svim on one of the Academy's many training grounds, waiting for the lessons to start. So, Svim said. I see you are here alone. I take it your fellow time traveler declined my offer, then? I'm afraid you didn't leave the best impression on him the last time you met, sir, Zorian told him respectfully. A pity. He could have used my help. But enough about the easily discouraged. We're here to help you. You say you've already worked with me to hone your dimensionalism? Show me then. Zorian didn't have to ask what Svim was talking about. He took out a large oval rock from his jacket pocket and outstretched his hand in front of him so Svim could see the stone. And then he generated a flawless dimensional boundary around the stone. Visually nothing happened, but Zorian knew Svim could tell the difference somehow. He supposed that his ability to sense magic was just that good. Passable, Svim said, passing his judgment. Keep working on it in your free time, but I suppose I can work with this. Zorian nodded and quietly pocketed the stone, his long experience with Svim allowing him to shrug off his mentor's ridiculous perfectionism without really getting upset. His dimensional boundary was more than just passable and they both knew it. Zorian had already started to work on forming a dimensional boundary over complex objects like small statues and planned to move on to live, moving insects soon. You seem to have rather good grasp on the basic teleport spell, and even know a great many variants, Svim said. So today I will show you how to defend against teleportation instead. I already know how to ward places against teleportation, pointed out Zorian. Truly? Svim said. Let's test that. He waved his hands, conjuring 4 glowing orbs of light that quickly assumed a square formation over a large section of the training ground. Ward that area against teleportation, and then I'll do my best to teleport in, Svim told him. Shrugging, Zorian went and did just that. He was quite good at warding in his humble opinion, but he had no illusions that his wards would actually hold against Svim's attempts to sidestep it. Who knows what kind of sophisticated teleportation spells his mentor had at his disposal. They're not his best work, perhaps as he was slightly rushed for time and didn't have any fancy materials to work with, but that should at least force him to spend some time too. Without saying a word, Svim unceremoniously dispelled his teleportation ward with a wide area dispel and teleported into the previously warded area. Though he knew it wouldn't help, Zorian just couldn't help himself. He just had to say it. That's cheating, he said. You told me you were going to try to teleport in, not that you'd just dispel the ward. And an actual attacker would play by the rules, Svim asked him. You don't think they would just teleport to the edge of the ward and get rid of it? If you gave me time to prepare, the ward would be anchored to something and be nigh impossible to dispel like that, Zorian said. And if you gave me time to prepare, I'd bring a couple of mana siphons to starve the ward into collapse, Svim said pitilessly. Ugh. Fine. Can I have another try? Zorian asked. Of course, Svim nodded. You can have as many tries as you want. 2 hours later and 5 ward refinements later, Zorian had a warding scheme that Svim couldn't just casually dispel whenever he wished. He had to extend the ward far outside the limits of the area indicated by Svim's glowing orbs, but apparently that wasn't cheating either. The man even praised him for finally thinking outside the box. And then when he finally couldn't dispel the ward, Svim promptly teleported into the area as if the ward had never existed. Zorian wouldn't have been so upset about that, except that Svim didn't appear to have used anything more complex than a basic teleport to do so. What happened? He asked the man. How did you teleport in with just the regular teleport? There are 3 stages of the basic teleport and I made sure to suppress each and every one of them. I made a microscopic dimensional gate and used it to extend a ward-suppressing bubble in the middle of the area, Svim said. Then I simply teleported into a patch of effectively unprotected land. It is a standard way of getting into heavily warded areas, though most people use magic items thrown into the area instead of creating a microscopic gate like I did. I presume this is because they can't create a gate like that, even a tiny one, Zorian said. Yes, Svim confirmed. But I'm hardly unique in this capacity, so it would be best to know how to deal with the tactic. Fine, Zorian said wearily. I admit defeat, Master. I don't know how to ward against teleportation effectively, so please teach me how. And if possible, I'd also like to know how to make the microgate thing too. I suspect that level of skill is still beyond you, my student, Svim told him with a small smile. But we'll see. Now listen closely. Days passed. Aside from getting lessons from both Alanik and Svim, Zorian spent his time playing games with Kiriel and creating experimental spell formula blueprints. He sought out Nora Bull's help for the latter task, discussing his designs with the enthusiastic woman that helped him start on his current path so long ago. She was surprisingly helpful even after all this time, though it did bring him a bit more attention than he would have liked, since Nora couldn't shut up about this amazing spell formula talent she had found among the students. With Red Robe out of the picture, however, he didn't care as much about attracting attention. He and Zack also went to hunt monsters that kept spilling into Cyoria a couple of times. Zorian already knew where a lot of them made their nests and which paths they took to the surface, and since he didn't have to feign ignorance around Zack, they thinned out monster populations considerably during those couple of visits to Cyoria's underground. At Zorian's request, Zack mostly let Zorian tackle the monsters on his own, only getting himself involved when he had to. which was embarrassingly often to Zorian's annoyance. His combat skills were steadily growing, but he still wasn't a one-man army like Zack was. Eventually Kale arrived at Amaya's place, and Zorian brought both him and Taven into the time loop. Kale was very easy to convince like usual, but Taven was still rather incredulous about the idea. Then again, she always was rather hard to convince that he was telling the truth. Currently he and Zack were just lazing around in an empty meadow far from any settlement. Well, any inhabited settlement. There was a small village nearby, but it had been completely depopulated during the weeping, and now the locals considered the entire area cursed and refused to move back in. Zorian didn't expect that to last for long, but for now the village remained empty and the fields overgrown with grass. Though the background of the place was rather morbid, it was a very beautiful location otherwise. Zack had really found some nice sights in his decades of wandering the continent. So what was Kale being so excited about the other day? Zack asked him. I don't remember him being so excited about the time loop in the previous restart. Well, since I no longer have to worry about keeping my head down to stay below Red Robe's radar, Kale decided he can conscript some of the local alchemists for that research he keeps transferring across restarts, Zorian said. That sounds very expensive, Zack said, frowning. It probably will be, Zorian said, nodding. I'd be annoyed at him throwing my money around like that, but in truth I really don't have much use for most of it. Besides, I can always dip into other sources of cash if I ever run out. Other sources? Zack asked. I know the locations of several secret stashes of the Ebasans and the cultists scattered around Scioria, Zorian said. And I can always rob their houses too, since I know where a lot of them live and all. But that's stealing, Zack protested. Yes. Zorian confirmed, mystified at Zack's response. Why wouldn't I steal from them? They're a bunch of murderous invaders. Well, I guess it makes sense, Zack admitted. But it just feels wrong to me, you know? But you didn't feel uncomfortable helping me violently break into Iranian settlements so we could violate their mines for practice and skill theft? Zorian asked curiously. Zack winced. I didn't think of it that way. Besides, they're giant spiders. It's easier to justify that sort of thing when I can't read their body cues and they don't bother to talk to me about it. That's because you had a mind blank on, Zorian noted. They literally couldn't talk to you. They did talk to me though. They asked, even begged us to stop plenty of times. Wow, said Zack awkwardly. That's pretty messed up. I always did wonder why you were so reluctant to go attack more than one colony each day. Zorian nodded silently. He wasn't exactly dying of guilt over what they did, but that was one restart he never intended to reenact in the future. There was no way he could keep doing that without becoming a monster. After a short silence, Zack spoke up again. You know, Zorian, he said. After watching you fight against the Arania in that restart and against other monsters in this one, I couldn't help but notice your combat magic is a little basic. I guess, Zorian said slowly, wondering what the other boy was getting at. It's not bad. Zack hastened to add. It's pretty good all things considered. But well, I don't think it's good enough for what we need to do. Fair enough, Zorian agreed. I am working on it though. I suppose you think I'm not doing enough? Actually, I was going to offer to teach you some more spells, Zack grinned. I'm not much of a teacher, but I don't have to be one in order to increase your arsenal of combat spells. There was no reason to say no. Zorian was always happy to learn more spells, especially restricted ones like most combat spells. Of course, learning spells was not the same as being able to use them effectively in combat, which was why Zorian still relied primarily on classics like Magic Missile, Shield, Fireball and the like. It quickly became obvious that many of Zack's favorite tricks wouldn't work well for Zorian. For instance, Zack loved the shield variations that created multiple layers of force instead of a single shielding plane. While extremely effective, they had extreme mana costs associated with them as well. He also loved using spells in large swarms to overwhelm enemy defenses, which was likewise an impractical tactic for Zorian. Okay then, this is one of those fancy hexagon shields you sometimes see in illustrations, said Zack, casting the spell deliberately slowly so Zorian could memorize the movements and chants. A ghostly sphere made of interlocking hexagons sprung out around Zack. I personally find it too much of a chore, but it sounds like it can work well for someone like you. The main advantage is that if an attack punches through, it will only destroy one hexagon instead of collapsing the entire shield. Though this does make the shield as a whole somewhat weaker than the layered aegis I showed you earlier. Hence me not using it much. That does sound more suited to me, Zorian admitted. We should probably stop for today, Zack said, dismissing the shield. It promptly dissolved into glittering motes of lights instead of simply winking out of existence like a regular shield did. Pretty. Yes, Zorian agreed. It's best I spend some time experimenting with stuff you've already shown me before I bother learning more new stuff. Don't be afraid to ask for help, Zack said. Hell, maybe one day you'll even teach me something. Zorian cocked his eyebrow at him. Who says I can't teach you something now? He asked the boy. I meant something related to combat magic, Zack clarified, waving his hand through the air dismissively. So did I, Zorian immediately countered. Zorian, please, Zack snorted derisively. Combat magic is my thing. I've been working on it for decades now. Even if you know some obscure spell I've never encountered, I probably already have something better in my arsenal. Any feat of combat magic you can do, I can either duplicate or exceed. Zorian hummed thoughtfully. That calls for a little test, I think. Do you think you're up to it? Sure, Zack shrugged. What do you have in mind? See that rock over there? Zorian said, pointing at a large stone some distance away from them. Zack motioned for Zorian to continue. Keep an eye on it while I cast my spell. All right, Zack said, retreating to a healthy distance and positioning himself so he could easily see both Zorian and the stone at the same time. Slowly and carefully, Zorian went through the motions of the spell. Zack looked torn between confusion and amusement, since the spell was clearly just a magic missile, but said nothing and opted to just watch instead. Zorian finished the spell. For a second nothing seemed to happen. Then the rock Zorian designated as his target exploded into a shower of stone fragments, causing Zack to flinch in surprise at the sudden, unexpected detonation. What? He asked uncomprehendingly. He gave Zorian a suspicious glance. Did you put an explosive glyph on that stone beforehand or something? Nope, Zorian said, grinning widely. I cast an invisible magic missile at it. Invisible magic missile? Zack asked slowly. Didn't you know? Zorian asked innocently. A flawlessly cast force spell is perfectly transparent, making it effectively invisible. It took me quite a while to achieve this, but I'm sure a master combat mage like yourself has mastered this years ago. Zack stared at him for a second before shifting his gaze to the shattered rock the magic missile had demolished. So, Zorian began, smiling brightly. How long do you think it will take you to duplicate that? 3 days later, Zorian was kind of regretting one-upping Zack like he did. Ever since then his fellow time traveler seemed obsessed with duplicating Zorian's feat, refusing to understand that this wasn't something you could achieve by working on it really hard for a couple of days. I'm not even sure why you're so upset about this, Zorian finally told him. It's just a neat trick that people like you have no need for anyway. It's the principle of the thing, Zack said, casting another magic missile at the tree in front of him. Zorian didn't think the poor plant would last long if this continued for long. I'm the combat guy. It's my thing and I've been at this for decades longer than you. I can't let you outdo me in this area. Zorian sighed at the explanation. He was getting uncomfortable flashbacks to Taven's little episode when she figured out how good of a combat mage he is. Was this a general combat mage thing? Well, at least Zack was not crying over it like Taven had. That would have been really awkward. At least let me show you how to do it properly, Zorian said. You'll never succeed by going at it in your current fashion. Zack stopped for a second, considering it before shaking his head. Maybe if I still can't figure it out in a few days, he said. I like to figure out these sorts of things on my own. Well, he tried. With a helpless shrug, Zorian left Zack to his pointless attempts at brute-forcing a problem that required finesse to solve. Eventually Zack either ran out of mana or got sick of casting magic missile. Probably just got sick of it considering his monstrous mana reserves, and decided to sit down next to Zorian for a while. Do you mind if I ask you a little about what you remember about the start of the time loop? Zorian asked after a while. Feel free, Zack shrugged. But keep in mind that the beginning of the time loop is very fuzzy in my mind and I keep having trouble remembering specific things about it. Yeah, you mentioned that, Zorian nodded. But I've been thinking about what you've said both recently and back when you still thought I was unaware of the time loop. That was an asshole thing for you to do, said Zack, interrupting him. I know I've said it before, but it bears repeating. You're never going to shut up about it, are you? Zorian complained. Nope, Zack confirmed. Anyway, Zorian said, deciding there was no point in continuing that topic. I remember you mentioning how you kept trying to convince everyone who would listen about the existence of the time loop. What was your logic behind that? I found myself in some crazy time loop and there was an invasion of the city at the end of every month, Zack said. Of course I wanted some help. So just to confirm, Zorian tried. Your earliest memories are of being confused by the situation you found yourself in, yes? The time loop was strange and novel to you, not something that felt natural. Zack frowned, lost in thought for a while. Yeah, Zack nodded. Sounds about right. It doesn't feel like the time loop was something I was informed of in advance or specifically groomed for, if that's what you're asking. I guess that's a point in favor of Red Robe being the true controller, huh? Him being the original controller still makes no sense to me, Zorian said. Why would he tolerate you all this time if you weren't somehow critical for the loop? Do you remember ever experiencing a time loop being cut short for no apparent reason? No, Zack said. I would have remembered something that abnormal. I did experience a few unexpected restarts while sleeping, but I'm pretty sure those were due to assassinations. I doubt Red Robe never died prematurely, so that means the time loop only resets when you die. That's a pretty obvious indicator it considers you more important than the two of us. They continued discussing the issue for another 10 minutes or so, with no solid conclusions by the end. Eventually they shifted to the topic of how to convince people around them they really were in a time loop, and Zack started sharing some of his more amusing failures in his initial quest for allies. You told Benesek that you're a time traveler? Zorian asked incredulously. I can't believe you thought that was a good idea. Shut up, Zack said. Aren't you friends with the guy? Sort of, Zorian admitted. But I'm afraid our friendship didn't quite survive the time loop and its influence on me. I kind of feel bad, since it's not his fault he can't learn and grow like I do, but you don't have to explain that to me, Zack said. I used to be casual friends with a lot of our classmates, but I feel completely alienated from most of them by now. Right, said Zorian. Best not to dwell on such a depressing topic. So what exactly happened when you told Benesek about the time loop? I thought he took it quite well at first, Zack said. Then I came to school the day after and found that he told half the school I've gone completely nuts. Though funnily, everyone seemed to have a different idea of what kind of crazy thing I believed in. Yeah, that sounds like Benesek, Zorian nodded. So when you said you tried to convince everyone, you really meant everyone, huh? Well, obviously I couldn't try to convince literally everyone in Cyoria, Zack said. But it was a lot of people. Students, teachers, city authorities, you name it. Zorian tapped his fingers against the ground around him, trying to think of some person from their class whose reaction to the time loop would have been amusing. How about Veyers? He asked Zack. Did you ever tell him about the time loop? Who? Zack asked, looking confused. Veyers Sporanova, Zorian said. You know, the guy who punched you in the face during class in our second year? He got expelled from the academy before the time loop began, but he had technically been our classmate, so I thought. He stopped when he noticed Zack was giving him a strange look. What is it? He asked. Zorian. Who the hell are you talking about? Zack asked him slowly. Zorian stared at Zack for a while before he began to explain things in more detail. I'm talking about Veyers Sporanova, he said. Member of Noble House Sporanova and our classmate during the first 2 years of our education. Tall, blonde, and with vivid orange eyes that had a slitted iris and made him look sort of like a snake. You two hated each other. Well, just about everyone hated the asshole, and he seemed to hate everyone around him, so I guess that doesn't say much, but anyway, the point is that there is no way you could have forgotten the guy. Zack shifted in place uncomfortably. I have no idea who you're talking about, he finally admitted. Well, now that was very, very interesting.